Thank you for being with us right now, and thank you for having participated in our first ever online Introduction to Plant Spirit Medicine. That was about a week ago. Part of that program, most of it in fact, was answering questions that people sent in about the program. Unfortunately, we didn't have time to answer all the questions, but as promised, we're going to fill in those questions that weren't answered then, and I'm going to do my best to answer them now. So we'll start with this question. The implication I am hearing is that there is no formula for helping people. I'm genuinely curious what the Course actually focuses on. That's a good question. And yes, the implication you're hearing is quite correct, that we don't promote or teach a formula for treating people, but rather an approach to treating people which starts with coming to understand in a deep way what does a person really need to be as well as they possibly can be. And then finding help from the plant spirit world to supply that to them. Now, since people are so very different, we find it's not really practical. It doesn't bring the best results to apply a formula to everyone who has a certain condition. Because for different people, that condition, whatever it may be, can result from causes that are unique to them. So what the Course focuses on then is how can we listen and hear so deeply so that we come to understand what is a person needs in order to create the conditions, as I say, that they can be as well as they can be, which is not formulaic. So that's what I would have to say to that question. Good question, as I said. Here's another one. What kind of homework would be given in the Course? The Course being referred to is the Course that for people who want to train to be plant spirit medicine healers. Well, there's various kinds of homework. Part of the homework relates to practice in some of the methods we have of assessing what's going on for a person and what they need. For example, the Chinese, learning to read well and interpret the Chinese pulses. There's quite a bit of homework in that. There's homework in going over their notebooks and understanding some of the theoretical protocols and approaches to the medicine. And there's some practice in learning to listen and hear the plant spirits and what they have to say and how to interpret that, given that they are very informative, but the information they pass on is not always in the form of language. And anyway, I can't give you an exhaustive list now, but there is a fair amount of homework that is required in between class sessions. Here's another question. How many plants does one learn? Well, in the class time together, we introduce and work together to learn from a small selection of plants, adequate to begin a practice later on. But the main focus here is not so much about teaching about certain plants, but rather teaching the students how to learn from the plants themselves, so that they themselves can develop their own group of friends and allies, what we call a materia medica, rather than taking somebody else's word for it, to learn directly from the plants themselves. And so that's our focus. Do you work with tinctures of the plant or tea of the plant to work with their spirit? In our approach, we don't. As you've heard in some of the stories that we're told, the method that we teach and prefer in some ways is to ask the spirit of the plant to come through our hands and simply deliver the medicine of the plant by gently touching a person on their body. Now, In other approaches, other forms of plant spirit medicine, of course, teas and tinctures can be given, and that can be a good way of delivering the medicine of the plants and their spirits. In fact, throughout the world, there's a number of different approaches to delivering the medicine, but the one that we favor is the one I just mentioned. Let's see now. Do you work with the tinctures? Oh, I just read that one, sorry. Is the class all day, 7 days, 9 to 5 the whole week? The basic answer to that question is a simple yes. And in fact, sometimes there are parts of the class, programs of the class that can even extend beyond dinner time. So it's set up to be, it's really only a practical in a residential format. So if the course is only offered in person, then one has to take off from work during that time, or does it start in the afternoon, evenings? Well, in a way, we just answered that question. It typically begins about 9 o'clock in the morning and goes till dinner time, sometimes a bit after that into the evening. Do you have any reading recommendations in preparation for the class? Well, if I may be permitted to do so, I would recommend reading my book, Plant Spirit Medicine, as a title, particularly the new version that came out 2 or 3 years ago, that will give a good exposure and experience of the spirit of the medicine itself, something about the approach, and so that's one thing I can recommend. Aside from that, there's really, at present, nothing that I'm familiar with in writing that deals specifically with our approach to plant spirit medicine. Now that will soon change. There are 2 plant spirit medicine healers in the United Kingdom who are writing another book about the medicine, but it's not in publication yet. You can watch for it. All right, next question. I currently practice acupuncture. Is this something I can incorporate into my practice, or something that would be a completely different practice? Well, it is a different practice. It doesn't mean that if you're an acupuncturist, you necessarily need to abandon that in order to practice plant spirit medicine. I know acupuncturists who studied plant spirit medicine and still practice both medicines, not at the same time with the same person, but they may find that for whatever reasons, the approach for one person that would promise the best results might be acupuncture, in another case, plant spirit medicine. So it is possible to incorporate them in that way. Can you speak about some ways past students integrated their practice as PSM healers into a career, or created a career out of it? Well, integrating into a career, if their career is another healing modality, well, I just mentioned how that can and has happened. But of course, many people have other careers, and in the same way I just mentioned with the question about acupuncture, it's not necessary and usually not even advisable, at least in the early phases of practicing plant spirit medicine, to completely abandon any other work that one is doing. But what is usually the way to go about it is set aside some day or days on a regular basis to devote to this practice while maintaining what's usually called your day job. And typically what happens is, over time, as one's practice grows, if you wish, you can devote more time to the practice of the plant spirit medicine and less to the other. And some people have gone so far as to just make their whole career into working with plant spirit medicine. Is it possible that I would not be able to learn the methods and materials? Well, I have to say this, that I've been teaching this course and for many years, and also for many years combined with Allison, who is the other teacher for this upcoming course. And neither one of us have ever come across somebody who wanted to learn and were willing to put in the work to learn who was not able to do so. Of course, some people you might have more aptitude, other people have to work a little harder, but the main thing is if you have the desire and the willingness to work, you can learn it. How do people justify the cost of the workshop? Well, the simple answer to that is that the faculty, together with the people at the Blue Dew Center who are in charge of putting these classes together, are aware of financial constraints that many people have, and we're doing all we can to provide the class that includes room and board on an acceptable and sometimes better than acceptable level, good teaching, and so forth, and make it as accessible financially as possible. Like it or not, these things do cost money to produce, and so if one was looking for a justification, I would simply say we're doing the best we can to make it as accessible as possible. Okay, here's another question. How will I know what plant to call for each situation? Is that caught in class? How to choose what help to call for? Yes, absolutely, it's taught in class. As a matter of fact, a very great deal of the class is devoted to teaching and learning about that. There's two aspects to that. One aspect is coming to learn what each different plant may have to offer to a healing situation. And the other part of it is coming to listen and learn deeply what a person may need in order to best favor their healing. Now, that is not a simple recitation of whatever symptoms they may have or other concerns, but looking more deeply into if there are concerns, if there are symptoms, where do they arise from in the person, and what sort of help are the symptoms themselves calling out for, other than simply suppressing them. So I would say that's a great question, and if you really want the best answer, take the course, because it's a bit involved. And as I say, much of the course, the majority of the course, is devoted to learning how to do exactly that. Okay, well, another question. Why not give the actual plant to the person? Why just the spirit of the plant? Is it about what level is being healed? Well, first of all, I would say that the spirit of the plant is the actual plant. It's not a separate thing. But we give the spirit of the plant because we have found that what people need in order to heal, particularly in these times and in this society, is that the root or the cause of their concerns inevitably has to do with something on the level of the mind, or even more particularly, the spirit. So we find, for practical reasons, it's the spirit of the plant that has the best capacity to touch and heal the spirit of the person. Now, the spirit of the plant can be delivered in many different ways, and in other parts of the world where they practice this approach to healing, teas and tinctures can be used. Believe it or not, in some places in the world they learn to sing the medicine of the plants to people. Anyway, there's a big variety of ways that this medicine can be delivered, but that is to say, the medicine of the spirit of the plant. But I wouldn't say that that's not giving the actual plant. I see that a different way. Embodying the spirit of the plant is done through taking it or dreaming it. Well, dreaming it is part of it, but there's also, well, let me say it this way. Embodying the spirit of the plant comes through establishing a relationship with the plant. And there can be various parts to that, including spending time observing the plant outdoors where it's living and growing, tasting it, smelling it, observing how it relates to the world around it. That all those things can be a very important part of it, learning to embody it. And oftentimes when one does that in a good way, one has an experience which is a little hard to describe, but sometimes I try to describe it as finding oneself in a situation where they feel like they themselves would be hard-pressed to say what is the difference between them and the plant. And there's a great deal of embodying that can come from that. And as the question says, dreaming it is also part of it. In our approach, we don't ingest it, however. We find that that's not necessary. Okay, here's a slightly more lengthy question. What advice can you offer to folks from low-income, marginalized communities that want to learn more about plant spirit medicine in order to heal themselves and offer healing support to their communities, but cannot afford to access your training? Is it possible to make offerings like tobacco and ask the plant spirits to bring in the medicine they need and learn over time through direct experience? Okay, so there's a few different parts to that question. The first part of this question, what can we do to help people who are interested in this medicine but don't have the means to do so? That's a question that I've been concerned about for some time, and we in the Blue Deer Center and Plant Spirit Medicine faculty have been talking about it. We don't have the complete answer yet, but we're beginning to look in the direction of having a kind of a scholarship program that could be funded by donations from individuals, could be funded by donations from foundations and so forth. So it's in the works. It's something we're looking at, and but it's not in place yet. In some cases, some arrangements can be made on an individual basis with the center to help out in those areas. Now, the rest of the question is about you learning to use plant spirit medicine to heal oneself, and make offerings of healing to other people. Is it possible to do this on your own? I'll sort of summarize the rest of the question. Well, first of all, I find that attempting to heal oneself is, I don't really advise it. Actually, if you look into it, well, certainly every healing approach and modality that I've come across always advises and sometimes insists that one doesn't do that. You could say the reason for that is that one doesn't have the vision and objectivity about oneself that is needed to do the job of healing properly. Sometimes I like to say that our illnesses grow up in our blind spots. So trying to heal yourself is like trying to see into your own blind spot, which by definition is impossible, or at least very, very difficult. And also, the reaching out to others for help is a step in the right direction, a direction away from isolation and seeing ourselves as self-sufficient, because as human beings we're not self-sufficient. We live in and through contact and relationship with others. So I don't really recommend now trying to heal yourself. Now, given that, it's also true that sometimes what I call spontaneous healing happens, where a person has a particular affliction or problem, and just seemingly out of nowhere, they can be healed, partially or completely. But that's very different. That does happen. It's rare, but it does happen. But that's very different from making a deliberate attempt to be the healer. In fact, any healer who does any sort of version of what I call healing the spirit must come to realize that no matter what, he or she, the healer, is not really doing the healing. And the healing comes from, you could call it the mysterious source of healing. You could say it's nature, or the world, or the divine, or however you want to say that. But it's not a personal capacity. So this blends into the next question, which is self-healing as effective as being healed by another healer using plant-spirit medicine? So having said what I just said, I'll answer that question very briefly by saying, no, it's not as effective. Okay, one last question from last time that remained well, we didn't have the time to answer it, but we'll do our best now. Are physical symptoms the only portal? Or can a person bring, say, a spiritual or psychological issue to the healer? Absolutely yes. The physical symptoms are not the only portal. And a person can bring a spiritual or psychological issue and present that to the healer. I would just add to that we maintain that in any case we don't heal symptoms. We don't even try to heal symptoms. What we do is try to ascertain what is the cause, what is the underlying situation that the symptom or concern is trying to bring attention to, and do the best we can to help nature create the best possible conditions so that nature can clear that up, because it's no longer needed as a message from some deeper part. So that completes the list of unanswered questions from last time. Thank you very much for being with us. I hope this has been helpful, and I hope to see you another time in person.